Today we are going to start 11.4, circumference and arc length. Circumference is the distance around a circle. The ratio of the circumference to the diameter of the circle is pi. And we represent pi as about 3.14. So the circumference of a circle, there's two formulas. If we're given the diameter of the circle, we're just going to do pi times the diameter. If we are given the radius of the circle, we are going to do 2 times pi times the radius. So for example 1, we're finding the circumference of the circle with a radius of 9 centimeters. So we have 2 times pi times 9. We plug that in our calculator. We get 56.55 centimeters. Next, we want to find the radius of a circle that has a circumference of 26. So this time we're given the circumference. We're going to plug that in first. And we're going to solve for r by dividing by 2 pi on both sides. So r is equal to 4.14 inches. Next, we want to find the diameter of a circle that has a circumference of 11 meters. So again, we're given the circumference. We're going to plug that in first. And then to solve for the diameter, we're going to divide by pi on both sides. So our diameter is equal to 11 divided by pi, which is about 3.50 meters. Lastly, we want to find the circumference of a circle that has a diameter of 3 radical 5. So we're finding the circumference. We're going to do pi times 3 radical 5. And we get about 21.07 feet for our circumference. Now we're going to move on to arc length. So arc length is a portion of a circle's circumference. Arc length is measured in centimeters, inches, feet, meters, kilometers, so on and so forth. Remember, we talked about arc measure earlier in the unit, and arc measure was measured in degrees as it was part of the 360 degrees in a total circle. So the difference here, arc length is a portion of the circle's circumference, where arc measure was a measure of the part of the circle's 360 degrees. So when we are working with arc length, we know that the ratio of the length of an arc to the circumference is equal to the ratio of the measure of the arc to 360 degrees. So to find the length of an arc, we must set up a proportion. So I'm going to put this really confusing sentence here into a proportion that'll be much easier to understand. So if we look at the diagram to the right, if we are trying to find the length of arc AB, the proportion we're going to set up is the following. So we have the arc length of arc AB over the circumference of the circle is going to be equal to the measure of arc AB in degrees over the total 360 degrees. So the relationship for this proportion is part to whole. So we have the arc length, which is part of the circumference, and then we have the arc measure, which is part of the 360 degrees in a circle. So whenever we have these problems where we're trying to find the arc length, we're always going to set up a proportion and then solve. So for example 5, we want to find the exact arc length of AB. So we set up our proportion. Now we just have to fill in all the information we know and use x for what we need to solve for. So we're solving for the arc length. So we're going to have x over the circumference. So let's find the circumference is equal to 2 pi r. So it's equal to 2 times pi times 8, which is 16 pi. Remember, because we're finding the exact arc length, we're going to leave everything in terms of pi. So we have x over 16 pi is equal to the measure of arc AB is always equal to its central angle. So the measure of arc AB is equal to 60 degrees. So we have 60 degrees over 360 degrees. Now we can cross multiply and solve for x, which is the arc length. So we have 360x equals 960 pi. We're going to divide by 360 on both sides. 360 does not go into 960 evenly, so we're just going to reduce that fraction. And we get 8 pi over 3. So the arc length of arc AB is equal to 8 pi over 3 meters. Remember, it's very important to include units for arc length and arc measure. Arc length is always measured in centimeters, inches, feet, meters, so on and so forth, where arc measure is in degrees. So if we'll take a look at example 2 or 6, again, we're finding the exact arc length. We're going to set up the same proportion. Here we're solving for arc length again, so we're going to use x for arc length. We have to find our circumference, which is 2 times pi times r, which is 12 here. Remember, we're going to leave it in terms of pi, so our circumference is 24 pi. Next, we have to find the measure of arc AB. So the measure of arc AB is equal to the measure of its central angle, which is 100 degrees. So we know the measure of arc AB is also 100 degrees. So we're going to have 100 degrees divided by 360 degrees, and now we can cross multiply. So we have 360x is equal to 2,400 pi. We're going to divide both sides by 360. 360 does not go into 2,400 evenly, so we're just going to simplify that fraction again. So we're going to get 20 pi divided by 3. So our arc length for arc AB is 20 pi divided by 3 meters. Remember, units are always important. Again, we're going to find the exact arc length. We're going to set up the same exact proportion that we have been setting up. So here we're solving for the arc length. I'm going to put x there. Next, we have to find our circumference. So our circumference is equal to 2 times pi times r, which is 2 times pi times 12. Which is going to be 24 pi. Next, we have to find the arc length. So the measure of arc AB is going to be equal to its central angle, which is 51. So then we have 51 degrees over 360 degrees. Now we can cross multiply and solve. So 360x equals 1,224 pi. Remember, we always want to leave everything in terms of pi when we are finding the exact arc length. We do not want decimals. We're going to divide both sides by 360. Again, 360 does not go into 1,224 evenly, so we're going to just simplify that fraction. And we have 17 pi divided by 5. So the arc length for arc AB is equal to 17 pi divided by 5 inches. Next, we want to find the exact circumference of the circle. So a little different here. Instead of using x for the arc length, we're going to use x for the circumference. So here they tell us that the arc length is 6 feet. So I'm going to have 6 over x, because we're solving for circumference, is equal to the measure of the arc is going to be equal to the central angle, which is 40 degrees. So the measure equals 40 degrees. And then we have over 360 degrees. So now we can cross multiply and solve. So we have 40x is equal to 360 times 6, which is 2,160. And then we're just going to divide by 40 on both sides, and x will equal 54. So our circumference is 54 feet. Next, we want to find the measure of arc AB. So here we're not finding the arc length, we're finding the measure in degrees. So they tell us that our arc length is 44 kilometers, so we have 44. Next, we have to find the circumference. So our circumference is 2 times pi times 120, which is going to be 240 pi. Remember, we always want to leave everything in terms of pi when possible. Next, we have x because we're solving for the measure of arc AB, and that's always over 360 degrees. So now we can cross multiply and solve here. We have 240 pi times x is equal to 360 times 44, which is 15,840. We're going to divide both sides by 240 pi. 240 does not go evenly into 15,840. I'm sorry. It does go evenly into 15,840. We get 66. So when we do divide, we're going to get 66 over pi. So the measure of arc AB is equal to 66 over pi degrees. So the exact measure would be 66 divided by pi degrees. That looks better. All right, lastly, we are going to find the radius of the circle. We're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So here we do not need an exact radius measure. We're just going to round to the nearest hundredth. So in this case, we're going to have to solve for the circumference first and then find our radius from there. So they tell us that our arc length is 11 yards. We're going to use x for the circumference for now because that's what we have to solve for. We know the measure of the arc is equal to 150 degrees. It's equal to the central angle. And then that always goes over 360 degrees. So we can cross multiply and solve for our circumference. 150x is equal to 360 times 11, which is 3,960. We're going to divide both sides by 150. So our circumference is equal to 26.4. So if our circumference is equal to 26.4, and we know circumference is equal to 2 pi r, we can just plug that in. 26.4 is equal to 2 pi r. We're going to divide by 2 pi on both sides to find our radius. And our radius is equal to about 4.20 yards.